Good morning. Yeah, today again we begin another part of our spirituality series with Chaplain Martin Edward Ohajunwa, the chaplain with you today, as I do every Wednesday with you. We continue with our spiritual guide, Howard Thurman, who has been generous with his powerful insights. So we're going to treat on the theme, the idol of togetherness. I think when I read this the first time, I was thinking about Francis Bacon, the idols of the cave, and how much he used that metaphor to talk about human civilization and progress. In this particular reflection by Howard Thurman, it kind of takes us to a deeper level that is more religious and more spiritual. And I would like to read from him, and then we proceed to reflect from our own understanding of what he has given us to digest. And I read, "If thy soul is a stranger to thee, the whole world is unhomely. If thy soul is a stranger to thee, the whole world is unhomely." There is no home anymore. The fight for the private life is fierce and unyielding. Often it seems as if our times are in league with the enemy. There is little rhythm of alternation between the individual and others. Land values are so high that breathing space around the places where we live is cut away. We flee from the crowded city to the quiet of the countryside. But the countryside becomes jammed with the sounds, the noises, the sights, the pressures which were left behind. Sometimes we escape into the city from the countryside. Because of the disintegration of the mood of tenderness that has overtaken us, we falter in our understanding of one another. There is a certain kind of understanding abroad. It is understanding that invades, snoops, threatens, and makes afraid or embarrasses. The craftsmen of the public test move in upon us, seeking to determine the kind of food we eat, the soap we use, the make of car we drive, and the best way to brush our teeth. What has become of the person? What has become of the private wish? We have made an idol of togetherness. It is the watchword of our times. It is more and more the substitute for God. In the great huddle, we are desolate, lonely, and afraid. Our shoulders touch, but our hearts cry out for understanding, without which there can be no life and no meaning. The great cause, even the cause of survival, is not enough. There must be found ever creative ways that can ventilate the private soul without blowing it away, that can confirm and affirm the integrity of the person in the midst of the collective necessities of our times. There is within reach of every man a defense against the grand version. He can seek deliberately to become intimately acquainted with himself. He can cultivate an enriching life with persons, enhancing the private meaning and the personal worth. He can grow in the experience of solitude, companioned by the minds and spirits who, as pilgrims of the lonely road, have left logs of their journey. He can become at home within by locating in his own spirit the trysting place where he and his God may meet. For it is here that life becomes private without being self-centered, that the little purposes that cloy may be absorbed in the big purpose that structures and redefines, that the individual comes to himself, the wanderer is home, and a private life is saved for deliberate involvement. End of this reflection, which in essence draws a clear picture of a habitation and the cluster it brings, and makes a distinction between what happens in the city life and in the country life. That while being in the city, we are overwhelmed with people, with noises, with pollution, material and otherwise. And then we can migrate to the country. Still, those factors that have affected us in the city follow us into the country, that we are always invaded, and our privacy is no longer there. We are consumed by the culture of consumerism. We are overwhelmed by the culture of noise making. Then it makes the soul to be clustered in such a way that it doesn't create the space for the divine essence in us. But we must intentionally seek that space, that sacred space, where we can commune, where we can commune with our higher power. It is in that space where we find our true self. Imagining closing out our ears and our eyes from both the more pollution that is material and spiritual is like moving away from the city life to the countryside to experience the expected serenity that helps us to be our human best. So this is the kind of summary I want to give to this beautiful reflection by Howard Thurman. As always, he will always lead us to think with him and to take something with us from our thinking thought. It's not always easy. For someone like me who grew up in the city, I can picture very well what Howard Thurman is speaking about. And it helps me to look back, going through memory lane, to imagine how I felt the first time I went to the countryside where the seminary was built. and I walked into the chapel while the seminarians had gone in for their afternoon rest, and the chapel was so peaceful. The entire compound was so quiet. I felt a kind of unction that calmed my wandering soul. It's no longer the blasting of the horns of the car. It's no longer the invasion of friends. It's no longer the noise of children. It's no longer the noise of traders. I encountered peace and quiet. So the metaphor of using the city life to give us how much we become so consumed with the noises and distractions of life is profound. It is that metaphor that Howard Thurman wants us to reflect on and keep something for the divine. So he says it clearly, the fight for the private life is fierce and unyielding. Maybe the person who used to live in the heart of Manhattan in New York, or Bronx, or Brooklyn, and then he moves to the southern part of Illinois. You have an expanse, hectares and hectares and acres of land, farmlands. There is a clear distinction. So living in a continuous struggle to be oneself and avoid the hustle and bustle of the city life is a yearning. There is a purpose of solicitude. There is a purpose for solitude. And one seeks this venture consciously because he's now overwhelmed by the city life. It is the serenity that brings soul, that brings peace to one's soul. He goes on to say there is a really little rhythm of alternation between the individual and the others. We are set up to be with the other. That is how we are created. No man is an island. We are structured to be with the other. We yearn for association. We yearn for relationship. A kind of together that is inevitable. But then we flee. We flee. From the city to the countryside. The question is, what difference does it make? The noise and the sounds we plan to flee from follow us to the countryside. The demons we are running away from follow us to where we go for care and well-being. Then what is wrong? Because of the disintegration of the mood of tenderness that has overtaken us, we falter in our understanding of one another. Something has broken. A foundation has shaken. That mood of tenderness is shattered. The disintegration of the mood of tenderness is both a conscious and an unconscious act. And we bring it into our relationships. The implications are often a lack of understanding, impatience, a lack of tolerance, loss of empathy, tension, acrimony, suspicion, restlessness. When we lose the mood of tenderness, we welcome chaos in our relationships. This notwithstanding, we find ourselves being controlled by the invasion of several things, like the food we eat, the news we listen to, the programs we watch, and anything of the sort. With a small tablet, with a small piece of technology, we can get CNN, we can get Fox News, we can get MSNBC, all these networks. With a small tool of technology, we can speak to anyone, and anyone can communicate to us. With that small tool of technology, we have access to all the social media and all that they offer us, the fake news and the rest of it. That whether I'm in Manhattan, Brooklyn, or Bronx in New York, or I am in Ayuka in southern Illinois, there seems to be no difference. All of this pushes us to the idol of togetherness. The idol of togetherness has become a deity, a mini god, and we worship it. Our Thurman is worried that these things become a substitute for God. This cluster of things, material things, distractions. And then what happens? We worship our source of information and the things they bombard us with. If you have a bad habit of watching a particular network, you become influenced by their propaganda. Because all we see today in the news media is a kind of propaganda. They mess with our head. They mess with our mental faculties. They mess with our way of thinking. They shape the way we think. And they want us to think what they think. And we almost believe in them and thinking that we are safe. We have lost our individuality. We have also lost the power of making objective judgment because of the way it has become. These various channels become an instrument of influence upon us. Our psyche, our way of talking, and assessment. A machinery and a propaganda. We are getting glued day by day to the material things. It's a way of idolatry. Because we believe what they say, hook, line, and sinker. In the midst of all this, what happens? Our shoulders touch one another like a jam-packed, a sardined bus or train during the rush hour. the subway of New York. Our shoulders touch, but our hearts cry out for understanding. Without which there can be no life and no meaning. Our hearts, the suffering, the vulnerable, the marginalized, the one who does not have access to shelter, to health care, to employment, we are still estranged from them because we don't understand what they go through. And when we see them, sometimes we are judgmental. The provocation of a touchless touch is the dawning of our aloneness. It dawns on us that we are alone in a world filled with people and a lot of material things. We can observe that in the race relationship which we are experiencing in our contemporary social engagement, we are all alone. And we scream and we shout, and it seems no one is hearing. It is often subtle, but the effect is still very provocative and felt on the victim. The ongoing protests determine that it is not just about those who have been killed in the hands of our police, law enforcement. It is about a history. It is about some experience that have gone far too long. Far too long. And nobody seems to listen because the structure has made it so. We live together, we walk together, yet we are not together, not at par with our sense of humanity. Even some may deny us of our humanity. Some may deny you of your humanity. Some may not even accept what you are saying. They can say you make it up. There was a time the Sandy Hook children, and then who were the experience at Sandy Hook when many children were gunned down. There was a platform that kept on saying fake news, fake news, fake news. It didn't happen. It did not happen until the parents came together and sued the network. Some even argue today that the Holocaust did not happen. And you add salt to injury, to the pains of the children, of the siblings, of the families who have borne this tragedy and painful loss. But that is where we are today. Howard Thurman is challenging us to seek other ways. What other ways can we seek? He says to us, there must be found ever creative ways that can ventilate the private soul without blowing it away. We have to find creative ways to ventilate the soul. A way that affirms the integrity of the person, forced to live in the midst of these collective necessities of our time. We can never run away from all these bombardments. So, what? What ways do we have? What else can we do? in this idol of togetherness, in this worship of a false God, in this entrapment of our mental selves. He observes something. He says something I would like us to, where I consider the high point of the reflection. There is within reach of every man or woman a defense against the grand invasion. We all have been gifted with something as a defense of this grand invasion. The grand invasion is all that bombard us and make us less human, less spiritual beings, less of the image of God, of our higher power. And what can these be? Seeking deliberately to become intimately acquainted with himself. You must intentionally seek to reconcile with yourself who you are. We must cultivate and enrich in life with persons, enhancing the private meaning of your personal worth. Because you are worth a great person in the eyes of your Creator. Growing in the experience of solitude, companioned by the minds and spirit of those great pilgrims who have left you logs of their journey. They have left you bridges with which to pass through. They have prepared a way that you may not sink in the river, but you can jump through the hurdles of time. Becoming at home within you by locating in your own spirit that encounter, that meeting point where you may find God, where you may meet your higher power. Becoming at home within yourself, locating your spirit, taking your spirit to that rendezvous, encounter with your higher power, and you find peace. It is there and only there that life becomes private without being self-centered, where the little purpose that's seeking us may be absorbed in the bigger, overall big purpose that structures and redefines our destiny, where the individual comes to himself as a retreat, where the wanderer finds a home, and our spirit that has wandered here and there looking for meaning and purpose will come to that rendezvous to find a home. And the private life is saved for a deliberate involvement. You choose from all your overall understanding of what life and purpose it brings, where you want to go, the path you want to tread. You own and claim yourself and not be driven by a propaganda or a bombardment. Like Socrates would say, the great philosopher, Man, know thyself. We need to find it. And we need to find it in our higher power, in God. St. Augustine says to us, our souls are restless until they rest in thee, my God. That's the great theologian St. Augustine. Let us continue on this path and be mindful of the steps we take and be able to overcome the bombardment and the propaganda of today, finding peace in the God who has created us. Thank you again for joining me in today's reflection and spirituality. May you find peace on your journey. God bless you. See you again, same time next week. One with you, Chaplain Martin Edward.